What do you think about community?
Community radio, something for the community, for the people.
Exactly. Today we have someone who is very much related to community radio and community media. That is none other than Dr. Kanchan Malik from University of Hyderabad, and she is the chairperson of UNESCO in related to community media. So welcome to our show, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
So what are the questions we are going to ask ma'am today?
Yeah, we are going to put her through a thorough test on about communication and everything. So before that, in the morning on the introduction, we also heard about how ma'am has worked for towards the communication development and everything. So my first question would be about what is your general opinion on community radio, ma'am?
Okay. General opinion in the sense that I can start by talking about how community radio came about in India, right? Because that's what my work is about. We started working on, doing research on community radio in the year 2000. When I say we, I mean the team at the UNESCO Chair on Community Media, of which I am a faculty fellow, and we have the chair as Professor Vinod Pavrala, and we have a team. It works as a center. The chair came about in 2011, but our work on community radio started in the year 2000. At that time, first we were trying to find out what community radio is. So as you have rightly said, community radio is a radio of the people, by the people, it's about the people, and it is always in the community. Right? So that's how we look at community radio. If you look at the broadcasting scenario in the country, you already have All India Radio, all of you know about it, right? Which is owned by the government. So that's the public radio. Then we have commercial radio. All of you listen to Radio Mirchi, right? So all those songs and, RJing that you all are doing also happens in the commercial radio, right? Now that is the second tier of radio in India. The third tier, which belongs to the people. So it is, a radio which is outside of the realm of state or public radio and the commercial radio. It is a radio of which is not for profit. It is meant for people to give voice to people who would not get access to All India Radio and to the commercial radio, right? So that's how we look at community radio. It's a radio owned by, people themselves. So that's what
such great radio words, ma'am. We are very inspired, and you were talking about community radio more than commercial radio, and it was very inspiring. And I'm going to ask about, according to you, can community radio bring any change to this world, ma'am?
Oh, wow. Yes, that you're putting a lot of responsibility on community radio. Yeah. So see, there are a lot of factors which contribute to bringing about change. Let us say community radio is one of them. Right? So there is lot of effort on the part of the people to bring about development, to bring about social change, right? And all those people who are making efforts towards this direction can use community radio to augment their work, right? So, and what we associate with community radio usually is, see, it gives you voice, right? So we say through people having a voice in the decision making processes, right? Or a voice to express their opinion, right? So all of this could lead to a situation or circumstances which can bring about change. This is something that is believed, worldwide. So of course we have community radio in India. It came about in the year 2006. The first policy which came about was in 2003, but that was only for educational institutions to set up radio. This was expanded, and then civil society organizations, we call them non-governmental organizations, right, which work in the area of development and change. So they were included in the policy, and they could also get licenses for community radio. The effort was that they could use radio to do work, to bring about change. Globally, that's what community radio is about. So whether it is in Australia, in Canada, in the US, in UK, you have what is called free radios in Germany, right? In Europe, you have community radios. So wherever radio is there, it is to give voice to the people who would otherwise not have a platform to express their opinions and to use those opinions to take decisions that will bring about change in the world. Yeah.
Such wonderfully said, ma'am, and I feel so proud to be in this community radio, because after you said it takes me to a different level of perspective on community radio, and it also tells me how much responsibility I hold in voicing the opinion of the people. So I'm so much inspired. But I also have a small question, ma'am.
Yes.
In this generation, people say that doctors and engineers are more valued, right? So what pulled you towards this communication side?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Doctor engineer is like, the usual thing you do. So if you want to do something different, you should come into communication. And within communication and journalism, you should probably try try doing work with what we call alternative media. Community radio is part of that alternative media, right? So mainstream media is about, making money, right? They also do a lot of good work, but that's very different. If you want to be in a sector which brings about some change in the long run, I'm sure, coming into alternative media would be the best thing that you can do. Let me give you an example. Yesterday, I was in Kalanjiam radio, right? Which is in Nagapattinam. This was a radio which came about after the tsunami, right? Now, right there, I met with about 5 people. 3 of them were women, right? So, Aparna, Durga, and there was Radhika, right? There was also Ranjini, who was telling me you have to pronounce it, as Ranjini. There's a South Indian name to it. So, that becomes 4 women actually, because Radhika came later. Aparna, these are women who belong to Nagapattinam. They do a lot of good work in the radio. But I'm just talking now about Aparna. Aparna does not belong to Tamil Nadu. She has come all the way from Gujarat, working with Kalanjiam radio and doing lot of programming. So I asked her, "You've come all the way?" She says it was the passion to work for development and change that brought this MA in communication or MA in journalism person all the way to Tamil Nadu to work with the community radio. So it's the passion to bring about change, right, and to contribute to the society that that people like us or other people who are working in media join journalism rather than going for the usual doctor, engineer kind of professions, right? I have nothing against those of you who are engineers, because I've recently met a lot of engineers who are innovating and trying to bring about change in the lives of the people. So it's all about the purpose for which you join a profession. Yeah.
Ma'am, we too are engineers who are related to community radio.
That's why I said.
And you have worked in many places and gained lot of experience, ma'am. And now I'm going to be specific. And what was your experience gained when you were working 2 years in economic times, ma'am?
Oh, okay. He's going back to when I started my profession, So I was just out of my master's in journalism and mass communication. That's what my degree was called. And I was always interested in academics. So that's how today I'm like professor and head of the Department of Communication in University of Hyderabad, because that's been my passion, academics. But my professor had told me that you cannot get into academics in journalism and communication without having some experience in media. So I got an opportunity with my background in economics to work with the Economic Times and to get an idea of how a newsroom operates, right? I was at the desk, and what I learned there was, of course, that journalism is a serious profession, right? There is a lot that journalism can contribute to the society, and the desk job was to ensure that any story which goes into the public domain must be accurate. It must be, so you all know about the fake news that is doing the rounds. So one thing that I learned in Economic Times, because we were editing, was that stories should be accurate. You must verify facts. They should be balanced, right? Both sides of the picture. And of course, you should always look at the ethical point of view when a story goes into the domain, into public domain. Is it doing some harm to the larger public interest? Then you should stop it. Of course, I also learned the skills of editing, right? I learned a lot from my reporter friends, what is news and what is not news, and so on and so forth. So, see, you learn a lot in your course. So, if you have done masters in communication or journalism, or you people are doing BTech, right? Engineers. So, you learn a lot in the classroom. But the real learning starts when you take up a job, right? So that is what it was for me, to understand the world of media before I come back to start teaching about media, right?
It was wonderful, ma'am. You were talking about ethical point on media, ma'am, and I want to ask this about this, ma'am. What are the general points on media ethics, ma'am?
General points as in whether a story is ethical or not.
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Like you have done some work on the providing a curriculum for
Yes.
media ethics. Right,
I
ma'am?
teach
So-
media ethics as a course in
Yes,
my
ma'am.
department. Yeah.
So can you give us a brief introduction to that?
Okay. See, media ethics is like your ethics in life also, right? So to do the right thing. That's what is media ethics. So when we teach this course, we don't give them a list of do's and don'ts. Everybody knows what is right and what is wrong, right? To speak the truth is right. Not to give wrong information in news or to create fake news is bad. This everybody knows. So when we talk about media ethics in a class or for journalists, we try to tell our students that they should build their skills of taking an ethical decision. So for example, if you are in a situation where you have to let's say give the news for a crime story, for example, right? Let's say the classic example is you're covering the story of a rape that has happened. Now in that, your job as a journalist is to give the whole truth, right? But if you give the name of the victim, do you understand how much harm it will cause to the victim, right? So should you be giving the name of the victim at all, or any sign which can lead to the victim and make her life impossible? So we are not supposed, it's our job to be responsible when we are reporting. So yes, our job is to give the truth, but then see that it does not cause harm to anybody. So deciding at a point what is the right thing to do, right? That is what we teach in media ethics. So we call it the hierarchy of values. Speaking the truth or causing harm, which is more important? So if the truth is more important in the larger public interest, you give the truth, right? If it is invading somebody's privacy, you do not give that kind of information, right? So that's how we balance the values, and that's what we teach in media ethics. That's what my class is usually about. It's a discussion class. So case studies we'll bring, and then we'll say, try to decide whether or not this is the correct news that you are giving, right? So that's how we will approach media ethics. Yes.
So everything in our life has ethics, and even media has ethics. That's the main thing about it. So apart from this, I have another question for you, ma'am. You co-authored a book, right? Other Voices, the struggle for community radio in India.
Yes.
So what do you think are the struggles faced by a community radio in India?
Yeah, sure. So let me tell you the story of the book Other Voices, the struggle for community radio in India. It is a co-authored book written with Professor Vinod Pavrala, who I just told you is the UNESCO chair on community media. We are both at University of Hyderabad, and as I told you, we started working on community radio in the year 2000. So all the work that we did for 5-6 years, we've put it together as the book on community radio. It is the first and the only book that you have on community radio in India. I'm sure there should be, I hope there would be more, right? What it documents is how community radio came about in India, right? So what were the struggles that led to the coming of the 2006 policy in India? So that's what it basically documents. It also documents what are the policies on community radio that you find in other countries, right? So we do a comparative analysis of policies in the US and Ireland and UK and so on and so forth, right? Then the book looks at the 4 case studies. So in the year between 2000 and 2006, as I told you, there was no community radio in India. The policy came in 2006, right? So what was there was just 4 initiatives on which were making programs like community radio. They didn't have license to broadcast. Okay, those 4 so when I was doing my PhD, everybody used to tell me you are chasing a phantom. It doesn't exist in India what you are doing your PhD on. So what we were doing our work on, along with Professor Pavrala, was on these 4 initiatives, so that their work feeds into the policy formation in the country, right? So these 4 initiatives were Deccan Development Society at that time. Now they are called Sangam Radio, right? The second thing that the second initiative was in Kutch. Kutch, you all may be knowing, it's in Gujarat, right? So it was Kutch Mahila Vikas Sangathan. They were running a program called they were running a radio called it was Ujas Radio. Okay, they were broadcasting on All India Radio slot. They didn't have license of their own, right? Then we had something called Namadhwani, which was in Namadhwani, which was in this was in Bangalore, right, Karnataka. They were in Kolar region. Okay. Then we had a radio station which was the fourth one. So Namadhwani, DDS, then Kutch Mahila Vikas Sangathan, and there was one initiative in Jharkhand, right? This was called Chala Ho Gaon Mein. Okay. So Chala Ho Gaon Mein was an initiative by the National Foundation of India. Right, so that these are the 4 initiatives on which we worked. We got the main principles of community radio, we learned from them and through our policy comparison, and then we tried to help those who were lobbying for policy on community radio through our research to bring about the community radio policy in India, to convince the government to come up with a community radio policy, right? So that's what we basically did, and this book documents those struggles, right? So mainly the struggles of coming up with a policy or community radio in India, to starting community radio in India. Right.
So lots of hard work behind a big thing to be achieved. So let's take a point from here that many people may say that we are chasing something that's not existing, but at this point we have to know that ma'am has chased something that has been achieved, and it has also rooted up in India, and it has spread throughout. Like it's so famous right now, and that's all a hard work of ma'am. So you have also traveled so many places, right, ma'am? So I would like to ask a small question about that. So what do you think are the differences in the community radio in India and also in abroad?
Yeah, very, very good question. See, you are very right. Now community radio is is an established sector in the country, right? Like PSG, we have 200 plus community radio stations in India. Many of them are doing very good work, right? In other countries that I have traveled, you have community radio stations are different. Every community radio station is different. So even in India, 200 community radio stations, you go to one, it will be different from the other. So similarly, when you go to different countries, depending upon their cultural context, where the community radio is based, who is running the community radio, whether it is a tribal population which is running the radio, or it is students which is running the radio, right? In which part of the country, which part of the world it is, every community radio's approach will be different. For example, if I were to compare in India with Africa, your radio station, as I saw, is very professionally run, right? Normally, if you go to rural areas, you will not find so many people there who are technically so so good, right? They are grassroots people who have picked up technology in very informal ways, but they do very good work, right? They have not been taught in a formal manner, like they've not done BTech or anything, right? Even the skills that they have learned to run community radio, like how to manage the what do you call it, the console, right? Even that they have learned in, let's say, let's say a period of 4 days. Right? So 4 or 5 days workshop, they'll pick it up. They think it's not rocket science. They've picked it up and they're running the station sometimes better than even, some of our students who are not into technology so much. So, there it will be, you'll find that they have just 1.5 room in which the radio station is run. And their soundproofing actually happens, in very, they'll use some very local material to do soundproofing and so on. Right? But like when in Africa, when I had visited stations in Africa, again there, they are more professional in their approach. They will have people who have certain qualification, right? So they are more professionally run than probably some of the rural stations here, right? So that's mainly the difference. But again, in Argentina, I had seen stations there, they share frequencies. For example, here you have a frequency, it only belongs to PSG can run it, right? So in Argentina, in order to make maximum use of the frequency, they share it with different groups who want to do programming. So one frequency is given, different groups can come into the station and make their programs. It doesn't belong just to, it may belong to one community or one organization, but it will be shared by different people. So that's how it is different. In Germany, for example, again very professionally run, but there it is called free radios. They don't call it community radio. Let me just come back to South Asia, right? So there, if you go to Bangladesh, again, there are 17 community radio stations there. All of them are very development oriented. So all their programming, news and all of that will be based on development, right? Again, Nepal. I should tell you about Nepal. Nepal has the maximum community radio stations in South Asia, right? But they don't have any community radio policy. Okay, so their broadcasting policy only is what covers this kind of community radio kind of radio also. They don't have a special policy. So 3 countries have community radio in South Asia. One is India, the other is Bangladesh, and then you have Nepal. But policy is there only in Bangladesh and
India.
And India. Yes. So that's how it is. It is different and it is meant to be different, right? Every community radio should be defined by its community. So that's how it usually works. Yeah.
Ma'am, you have not only chased a phantom, you have chased many countries, ma'am, actually.
Okay.
And you have traveled many places, but what is the main point to extend the reach of community radios, ma'am?
Okay. See, I have been fortunate to get opportunity to go to many countries and, interact with people who are, running community radio stations. It's a great fortune. And if you're talking about how to increase the reach, see, there are 2 ways. One is how you define reach. Reach is about just scaling it up and reaching more audiences. If that is how you define reach, that is really not the purpose of community radio. Okay, community radio is meant for the community. So if you want to increase the effectiveness of community radio, it can happen only through engaging the community and making the community participate and think of the community radio as its own. So that is what could increase the potential of the community radio. Instead of making it, a station which reaches very far and to a